Ladies and gentlemen, Young Thug is finally home. Now, many of you guys will know that Young Thug has been fighting a case, and that case that he's been fighting has finally come to an end. Now, the reason this has come to an end is because Slime Life Shorty actually got on the stand and he said something that would bring this case to a mistrial.
And is there another hashtag?
Free Quay.
Now, when Slime Life Shorty was called to the stand, they would ask him to read an IG post. Now, as he was reading this IG post, he ended up saying Free Quay. Now, the problem with him saying Free Quay when he was reading the captions on this IG post is that the jury was supposed to be presumed ignorant when it comes to knowing if a defendant is in jail or not. And obviously, when Slime Life Shorty said Free Quay, he basically let the jury know that Quay is in jail, basically, and he was not supposed to do that, so that led to a mistrial. Now, when this happened, the defense thought it was a clear abuse of mistrial so that they can essentially come back and retry Young Thug and get him doing that life sentence. So they basically wasn't with it. They called it out in the courtroom and said, hey, these folks are basically trying to purposely fuck up this case so they can come back, retry him, and throw him away for good.
Now the jury has repeatedly heard about Mr. Nichols being in jail, being in prison, and you cannot unring that bell. We would ask for a mistrial. Your Honor, and I just want to briefly add that it is painfully obvious that the state is not prepping their witnesses. You can tell by the way when the witness spoke the first time and he said, oops, am I not supposed to say that? Like, oh, I had no idea, which makes it obvious that the state had not spoke to him, had not prepped them, and this has happened repeatedly. It's happening over and over again, Your Honor, and we're just not going to be able to unring 100 bells. Hold on, Matthews, before you say we have a stipulation. F, Judge, once you rule on our mistrial, right, on my motion for a mistrial.
Okay, so are you asking, what kind of a mistrial are you asking for?
Your Honor, I believe that we were goaded into the mistrial.
Okay, well, I do not believe that, because if you had seen Ms. Hilton's face when that came out of the witness's mouth, she was appalled, and I do not believe that they are purposefully trying to insert error into this trial to make y'all ask for a mistrial so that they can try this case again. I think it is continued, and I am sorry, y'all have, you know, this.
So then the defense and state, they went behind closed doors and they figured out a plea deal.
Participation in criminal street gang activity, how do you plead?
I plead guilty.
As to count 58, violation of the Georgia Controlled Substances Act, how do you plead?
Guilty.
As to count 59, violation of the Georgia Controlled Substances Act, how do you plead?
Guilty.
As to count 60, violation of the Georgia Controlled Substances Act, how do you plead?
Guilty.
As to count 61, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, how do you plead?
Guilty.
And as to count 1, conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, how do you plead?
No law.
As to count 56, participation in criminal street gang activity under the leadership charge, how do you plead?
No law.
I think you didn't ask about count 62.
As to count, thank you, Your Honor. As to count 62, possession of a machine gun, how do you plead?
Guilty.
Now, they offered Young Thug this plea deal, basically time served, 15 years probation, but they also put restrictions on his release, and Thug didn't like these restrictions. He basically thought that these restrictions were too strict, so essentially he said he's not going to be down with it. Now, this is when they tried to give Thug a 40-year sentence and they wanted him to serve 25.
At this time, the state is making a recommendation of 45 years with 25 to serve in custody, followed by 20 on probation, subject to the special requirements of 1615 the gang statute. Mr. Williams, did you discuss the state's previous offer with your attorneys?
Yes.
Okay. The total sentence was 43 years to serve, with the first 5 years in prison commuted to time served, followed by 15 years on probation, followed by 23 years in prison, which would have been served in confinement except that if defendant had complied with the special conditions of probation imposed as part of this sentence.
Would have been, yes, Your Honor, Mr. Williams would have been released today for 15 years on probation. If he successfully completes that probation, then he would not have to go to custody. If he did not, he'd face probation revocation as well as 23 years, as the court said, backloaded in the Georgia prison system. But we could not come to terms on all the conditions that the district attorney was insisting upon.
Okay.
Now, this is when Thug went back for renegotiating, and essentially the judge gave him a 40-year sentence still, 15 years probation and 5 years time served, and basically 20 years backloaded, so that will go into the time served also. Now, we're going to get into some of these restrictions. They're crazy. First restriction is that he can't even go back to Atlanta, and Thug is one of the biggest musicians out of Atlanta, and he can't even go back. He's banned from Atlanta. He's banned from rapping about any gang activity, anything so all that slime, all that shit you guys be seeing, you're not going to be seeing that anymore. He's banned from doing that as well. And he basically has to go to schools and basically give presentations on anti-gun violence and anti-gang violence, essentially. So he has to go around giving speeches about how he shouldn't be a criminal, and also he's not allowed to be around other gang members. So if there's any other rappers gang banging, he's not going to be collabing with them, at least in person. Now, Young Thug's lawyer was absolutely spanking them boys in court, like just making them look stupid, just spanking them. But he still isn't happy about Thug being released, because he basically thinks like this should have been a not guilty verdict. Like, why are we doing all this extra stuff, all these extra conditions, knowing this guy's a gang member? He's been a gang member his whole life, so it's going to be hard for him to stick to this probation. So he basically wasn't happy.
As far as how Jeffrey's feeling now, he knows my feelings, which I'm not going to reveal for attorney-client privilege, but this is not the same as a not guilty verdict. That should have been rang. But nobody here wakes up every day on a concrete floor that they're calling his bed, gets up at 4:15, gets shackled at his feet, his waist, and his hands, comes to the Fulton County Courthouse to be on concrete, eating out of a bag. Doritos is his meal of choice. And then coming to a courtroom and sit there with a leg chain on him every single day and hear lie after lie. So for Jeffrey go home today and not have another 90 days or 120 days of it, he is very happy, thankful to the honorable court. So to answer your question, this was not what I wanted. I don't believe that it is just, but I believe that under these circumstances, it is justice for Jeffrey Williams, and he is delighted, as are we, and thankful.
And Young Thug's dad as well basically shared the same sentiment. Now, moving forward, obviously this is good for Young Thug, but, you know, like 15 years probation, you know, Thug is never allowed to mess up again. That's going to be very hard for him. And also, if Thug had did like a year and a half more, he could have possibly got off completely free, you know, no punishment, no nothing, no extra conditions, if he just kept fighting for a little bit longer. But obviously you have to understand, he's been in there for years already, been missing out on money. He was living a millionaire lifestyle before. He wants to go home and be with his family for Christmas, so you can't blame him for getting out earlier. But guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think Young Thug is going to stick to his probation, or do you think he's going to be going back to the jail? And do you think also, is this a good deal? Do you think this is a good deal, or do you think they kind of set him up? I personally think they set him up with this, but let's see how it plays out. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'm out.